Fairmount Park, where Kim Sampson spent her career, is the only horse racing track in our region. However, around the turn of the 20th century, horse racing was the most popular sport in the United States, and St. Louis was front and center with almost 20 tracks on both sides of the river. Joining me now is Nancy Carver, author of Making Tracks, the untold story of horse racing in St. Louis. Welcome, Nancy. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So, tell it to us. What happened? What happened to horse racing in St. Louis? Now, we have to make note that Fairmount is in Illinois.
Yes, and
what was the cause of the demise?
Our, the books that I wrote about, or the tracks that I wrote about. But what happened was 1905, and Governor Folk was in power, and he decided he was going to put an end to gambling, because at that time, gambling was prevalent on racetracks. So he ended up getting the police to raid Del Mar racetrack, and that put an end to racing in St. Louis.
Knocked it out.
Yes.
Was there ever racing that didn't involve gambling? That's not really a thing, is it?
No, there was always gambling of some sort.
Okay.
But the newspapers always made it seem like everyone was gambling, and that's not really true. People would come just to have the thrill of watching the horses and to see who won. But there was gambling.
Well,
yes.
Now gambling might come back into the fold for sports betting here in Missouri, so we'll see what happens with that.
Yes.
You know, it's funny, the Rams left St. Louis claiming that St. Louis couldn't support 3 major league teams. And there were almost 20 racetracks here in this region. And I'm not a businesswoman, but that sounds like a lot of competition to have at one time. How did they thrive, or were they successful with all of them operating at the same time?
Well, they didn't actually all operate at the same time, because they began in 1767 and ended
Okay,
in
so that's over the
1905.
course of all that time.
Yes, over the course. So my book actually splits them up into 3 categories. So in the first part are the smaller tracks, when it was more, it just didn't have all the amenities that the later tracks did, but it was fun and more casual. And
but they did work together, right? In when they would schedule their races, so they weren't at the same time?
Well, in the second part of the book, where there was more competition and tracks were running potentially at the same time,
Yeah.
there was the ability to try to work together and make sure that that didn't happen. But as the tracks became more expensive to maintain and it became more costly, then the racetrack owners really didn't want to work with each other.
Right, it was survival of the fittest at that
exactly.
point. Yeah.
Yes. So there was a lot of political involvement, legal involvement to try and get rid of the competition. And so it was whoever
Right.
could come on top.
Well, and you know about this a lot, not just because you're did a lot of research for your book, but you've got a little family connection.
Yes, my great uncle was part of a triumvirate that owned the 2 major racetracks that were here in 1905, as well as other tracks in Illinois and in St. Louis and other parts of the country as well. So he was very big in racetrack history, and I had some information about my family that I used in the book.
So what happened to those people that owned the racetracks when all of a sudden, sorry, gambling's over? Did they just lost their livelihood?
Well, my uncle, and he's the one I know the most about, he was very smart about it. He sold the land and made a lot of money.
So if you own the land, that was really the way to go.
Yes. So especially on Del Mar Boulevard, he sold a lot of that land and became even wealthier than he was when he was involved in the horse racing.
When horse racing originally was for that country club elite crowd, but then it changed over the course of time.
Yes.
How and when did that happen?
Well, it really happened, I would say, around 1900, when my great uncle and his 2 partners took over Fairgrounds Racetrack. Because before that it was owned by wealthy people, and they made a lot of investment, and they really wanted only wealthy people to come, but it became so expensive to operate the track and maintain the track, they needed to
They need more
unload it.
customers.
Yes. Yes.
So anyone with any money to spend could come.
Right.
But I'm just going to take a guess that somebody like Kim Sampson would not have been a jockey during this time.
Right.
Yeah. They weren't that progressive there.
No.
Are there any remnants out there? Anything that we could see of any of these old tracks?
Well, you can go to University City, and East Gate and West Gates are still there, and those were actually the gates to the park. And it was situated next to Delmar Gardens, which
Okay.
was also a big entertainment center.
Okay, great.
And that's how the loop got its name, because the streetcars came down and made a loop in
Right
between
there.
the two places.
All right, well, we'll have to check that out. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank
I
you.
appreciate you taking the time. And if you want to learn more about horse racing in St. Louis, pick up a copy of Making Tracks, The Untold Story of Horse Racing in St. Louis, which, by the way, is published locally by Reedy Press.